7 years of hard work, and I'll settle you with 30 million naira. The choice is yours." James let out a bitter laugh. 7 years. That's a long time. You know, I thought I'd never hear from you again. But now you're offering me a deal? After everything? Chief Thomas didn't even hesitate. "We all make mistakes, James. I've been a fool. But I'm trying to make it right. We can rebuild. Together." James shook his head, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. But then his mind returned to the 30 million naira. The image of his old university friends flashing. Their success. The pressure of constantly being told he wasn't good enough. 7 years. He could survive 7 years, right? "All right, I'll do it," James said, his voice firm despite the doubt swirling in his chest. "Good," Chief Thomas replied, almost relieved. "We'll start tomorrow." James hung up the phone, still unsure of whether he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or if this was his way out. But one thing was clear. He had no choice. Welcome back to the part 2 of this video. Please do well to watch the part 1 if you missed it. The next day, James found himself at Chief Thomas's luxurious electronics business. The same business that had once belonged to his parents, now run by the very man who had poisoned them. The building was impressive, with sleek glass windows and a clean, modern interior. But James couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense of unease as he walked through the front doors. It was like stepping into the lion's den, knowing full well that he was both prey and survivor in this game. "Welcome aboard, James." Chief Thomas's voice was smooth and confident as he greeted him in the lobby. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, a sharp contrast to James's simple, somewhat wrinkled outfit. James shook his uncle's hand. "Thank you, Uncle. I'll do my best." As James walked through the halls, passing by sleek electronics, high-end gadgets, and employees busy with their tasks, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Everyone knew who he was. They didn't say it, but he could tell by the way they looked at him. James's first task was to oversee the inventory and customer service. He was surprised by how quickly he fell into the rhythm of the business. Despite the initial awkwardness, he began interacting with customers, smiling at them, making sure they were happy. He was good at this. But his uncle's shadow loomed large. As the days passed, James realized that his role in the business wasn't just about managing the store. It was about proving himself, proving to Chief Thomas, to the world, and to himself that he could thrive, even in the most hostile of environments. And through all of this, James maintained his sense of humor. Despite his internal struggle, he found solace in the little things, like when the cashier accidentally gave a customer too much change, or when an old lady asked if the televisions came with free cable. James had to politely explain that cable wasn't a standard feature of electronics. These small moments reminded him that life wasn't all bad. There were still moments of lightness, even in the darkest places. But the question still remained. Could he ever trust Chief Thomas again? Or was this all just another twisted game to manipulate him? James would soon find out. It didn't take long for James to realize that working for Chief Thomas was a test of endurance. Every day felt like a battle. One that he didn't choose, but one that he had no choice but to fight. He was surrounded by luxury, but none of it felt real. The fancy gadgets, the shiny glass windows, the pristine floors. None of it mattered when the heart of the business was tainted by betrayal. James spent his days at the electronics store managing the inventory and handling customer service. But it wasn't just about the tasks. It was about staying true to himself. Despite his anger toward his uncle, he refused to let bitterness turn him into someone he didn't want to be. Every time he looked around the store and saw the flashy electronics, he reminded himself that it wasn't about the objects. It was about people. And so, he did what he did best. He smiled. He made customers feel at home. Whether it was helping an elderly man pick out the right TV, or explaining to a young couple why they didn't need to spend an extra N50,000 on a fridge with Wi-Fi, James was relentless in his kindness. People were drawn to him, not because he was the boss's nephew, but because he genuinely cared. He remembered people's names, their stories, and their needs, something Chief Thomas would never have cared to do. Within a few weeks, the store's sales began to rise. Not by a huge margin, but the improvements were noticeable. The customers who came for one thing often left with two. They came back, bringing friends, raving about James's customer service. "Man, you really know how to make a customer feel good," one regular said, shaking James's hand. "Just doing my job," James replied, though he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. "I'm like the suya of customer service, spicy, satisfying, and worth coming back for." The regular laughed, slapping James on the back. "Well, if I ever need an electronics expert with a side of suya, I know who to call." That small exchange felt like a victory to James. It wasn't about being rich. It wasn't about having the biggest house or the most expensive car. It was about the relationships he built, the connections he made, and the way he treated people. But his progress didn't go unnoticed. Chief Thomas, though he was more concerned with profits than people, saw the numbers. The store was doing better, and it was all thanks to James. And for a while, that was enough. For a while, James allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Maybe this would be the way out. But of course, nothing was ever that simple. It started with a strange shift in Chief Thomas's behavior. For a man who had always been aloof and cold, he started showing up more often at the store. At first, James didn't think much of it. He was just there to make sure things were running smoothly. But soon, it became clear that his presence wasn't just about overseeing operations. It was about control. One afternoon, as James was helping a customer decide between a washing machine and a dryer, Chief Thomas walked up to him with that signature smirk plastered across his face. "James," he said, his voice as smooth as ever, "the sales are up, but the margins are still low. We need to do better." James blinked, surprised. "We're improving, Uncle. You've seen the numbers. Maybe if we keep focusing on customer service." "Customer service?" Chief Thomas interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "You think that's enough? We need to push for more expensive models, more commissions, more profit. If you want to make money, you have to take risks." James swallowed hard. "I understand, but people buy what they need, not just what's expensive." "People buy what they're told to buy," Chief Thomas said with a sly grin. "If you make them believe they need the most expensive thing, they'll buy it. We sell dreams, not products." James felt a cold chill run down his spine. "I'm not sure I agree with that approach, Uncle." "You don't have to agree, James. You just have to do it. This is business, not charity." The tension hung in the air like a thick fog. James knew his uncle was ruthless, but hearing him speak so plainly about manipulation made him sick to his stomach. "You really believe that's all this is about? Selling dreams?" Chief Thomas chuckled, his eyes twinkling with malice. "James, you're young. You'll understand soon enough. This is how the world works. Adapt or get left behind." James wanted to argue, but something in the pit of his stomach told him it wasn't worth it. Instead, he walked away, his mind swirling with frustration. Adapt or get left behind. Was that the lesson he was supposed to learn from all of this? The days that followed were filled with a tense quiet. James went through the motions, trying to focus on the work that mattered. But Chief Thomas's words echoed in his mind. As much as James hated to admit it, he was beginning to see the cracks in the foundation of his own beliefs. Could he really keep doing this? Was he willing to compromise his values for the sake of success? He didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. Chief Thomas would keep pushing, keep testing him. And James had to decide if he was willing to play his uncle's game or if he would continue on his own path, regardless of the price. That evening, as James walked out of the store, he was stopped by a familiar voice. "You're looking mighty fine today, Jay." James turned to see Aid, one of his old university friends, standing by the entrance. Aid had the same cocky grin on his face, the kind that James had seen 1,000 times before. "Aid? What's up, man?" James greeted him, a slight smile forming on his face. "Not much. Just thought I'd drop by and check out the family business," Aid said, looking around at the expensive displays. "Not bad for a guy who couldn't land a decent job, huh?" James frowned. "Yeah, well, life has a funny way of working out." Aid raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, funny how that works. So what's the deal, man? Still working for your uncle? You've been here for months now. I thought you were supposed to be starting your own thing." James shrugged. "Still working on it." But as he looked around, at the rows of sleek electronics and the polished floors, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the question hanging over him. Was this really what he wanted? Or was he just going through the motions? It wasn't easy to admit, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was no longer just trying to survive. He was starting to build something. And whether Chief Thomas liked it or not, James was going to make sure that something was his own. But first, he had to survive the game. And right now, it was all about playing it on his own terms. James woke up that morning with a strange feeling in his chest, as if the world was closing in around him. It wasn't just the weight of the work or the tension with his uncle. No, it was something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. The air felt heavier than usual. The quiet moments of peace he had come to enjoy in the past few months felt like a distant memory. His phone buzzed across the table as he sipped his coffee, the low hum of the city filling his ears. He stared at the screen for a second, unsure if he was ready to face another notification. But it was from his uncle, Chief Thomas. "Meet me at the office today, 11 a.m. sharp. Important matter." James frowned. Important matter? It wasn't like Chief Thomas to give him advance notice. Normally, it was a last-minute request, demanding James's attention like he was some sort of errand boy. The sudden formality of the message made James suspicious. What was he planning this time? The rest of the morning passed in a blur. As he dressed and prepared himself mentally for the day ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The store had been doing well, despite his uncle's constant push for higher sales targets, and James had been doing his best to keep things running smoothly. But his uncle's sudden interest in meeting him had thrown him off balance. At 10:45 a.m., James left his apartment and made his way to the office. The streets of Lagos were as chaotic as always, filled with honking cars and hurried pedestrians. It was a typical day in the city, yet the tension in James's chest grew with every step he took. By the time he entered the sleek glass building that housed his uncle's electronics empire, James's nerves were on edge. He'd always hated this place. Too polished, too cold, too empty of real human connection. It was a world of greed, profits, and manipulation. And yet, here he was, walking straight into the lion's den. As he entered the office, the receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen. "Good morning, Mr. James. Your uncle is expecting you in his office." James nodded and made his way down the long hallway. When he reached the door to Chief Thomas's office, he paused for a moment. What was going on? Why had his uncle called him in so suddenly? He knocked once before stepping inside. Chief Thomas was sitting behind his massive desk, a look of controlled calm on his face. The office was the same as always. Cold, sterile, with expensive artwork on the walls and a view of the city skyline. It was a symbol of wealth and power, and James had learned long ago that his uncle's definition of success was measured in money, not people. "Come in, James," Chief Thomas said, waving him toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. We need to talk." James hesitated but sat down anyway. His uncle's tone was unsettling. It wasn't the usual authoritative command, but something more serious. "What's this about, Uncle?" James asked, trying to sound casual, though his gut was telling him something wasn't right. Chief Thomas smiled, a cold, calculating smile that James had come to dread. "I've been watching you, James. You've been doing well at the store. The sales are up. I've been impressed with your work." James nodded, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "Thanks, I'm just trying to do my best." "But there's a problem," Chief Thomas continued, his tone turning serious. "I've been thinking about the deal we made. 7 years of service and then I'll settle you with the 30 million naira. James's stomach sank. This wasn't going to end well. "I'm sorry, Uncle, what do you mean?" James asked, his voice low, though he could already feel the betrayal brewing. "It's simple, really. I've been thinking it over, and I've decided you're not getting the 30 million naira. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He felt his heart drop into his stomach, his mind racing to understand what his uncle had just said. "What? What do you mean I'm not getting it? We had a deal." James's voice rose, more out of shock than anger. Chief Thomas's smile widened. "Oh, don't be too upset, James. It's not personal. It's just business. The 30 million wasn't as much of a guarantee as you thought. You see, after careful consideration, I've decided to keep it for myself." James stared at his uncle in disbelief. "You're joking, right?" He laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "You can't just break our deal like that. We've been through 7 years of this. I've worked hard for you, and you—" "I don't owe you anything," Chief Thomas interrupted sharply, his tone colder than ever. "You're a fool for thinking you could trust me. But then again, you were always the naive one. You should have known better than to think a man like me would just hand over 30 million naira. You're lucky I even gave you a chance." James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "You son of a—" But he stopped himself. He knew he couldn't lose control. Not yet. Not with everything on the line. "You're a snake, Uncle. I should have known you'd do this to me. After everything you did to my parents, you think I'd still trust you? You've been lying to me this whole time." James was shaking with anger, but he kept his voice as steady as he could. Chief Thomas just shrugged, as if James's words didn't matter to him at all. "If you're so angry, you're welcome to leave. I don't need you here anymore." The words stung more than James expected. He felt the walls closing in, the air thick with betrayal. But even as his hands clenched into fists, he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't just about the 30 million naira anymore. It was about something deeper, about his family, about his parents, and about the path he had to walk from here on out. "Fine," James said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I'm done with you." He turned and walked toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back, not even once. James stormed out of the office, the weight of his uncle's betrayal pressing down on him with every step. He didn't know what was next, didn't know how he would survive without the money he had worked so hard for. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let his uncle win. As he walked down the hall, a thought crossed his mind. If this is how it's going to be, then fine. I'll make my own way. I'll do it without him. But deep down, the sting of betrayal was sharp, and the road ahead felt darker than it ever had before. Stay tuned for the part 3 of this video. Please don't forget to give this video a like, share, comment, and subscribe.